introduce Stanislav Kulchytsky, one of Ukraine's most prolific and well-known historians, author of over 2,000 publications, most on 20th century Ukraine, especially on the interwar period. He began his career as an economic historian, but in the late 1980s, he shifted the focus of his study to the Ukrainian peasantry, among other topics, and thus he began his study of the Ukrainian famine at that time. And we're here to tell you a little bit about him and his book, The Famine of 1932-33 in Ukraine, an Anatomy of the Holodomor. Its publication comes after 30 years of study and many publications on this topic by the author, so it can be regarded as a distillation of these many years of study and many works written on the topic. However, it is really the only book-length study of his to have appeared in English translation. I want to stress this point because I think it's important the book has appeared in English. Although the author is a leading authority on the Ukrainian famine worldwide, it seems that relatively few scholars and students in the global scholarly community that study the Soviet Union, and particularly the Stalinist period, are familiar with his writings or know them well. In large part, this is because they may not know Ukrainian or simply have glossed over, overlooked, or ignored his contributions. As English is the dominant language in global scholarship today, we now have some satisfaction in knowing that the author's latest study and views on the Holodomor will now be readily available not only to those studying the Soviet Union, but to a wider readership. Published in the same year as Anne Applebaum's Red Famine, it will make available his contribution to the ongoing scholarly debate in English on the famine, its place within the context of the other Soviet famines, and whether it should be viewed as genocide. Those who have read at least some of Professor Kulchytsky's works on the famine in Ukrainian have come to recognize his key contributions and pioneering role in the field. Although Robert Conquest and James Mace began studying the famine several years earlier than Dr. Kulchytsky, they did not have access to the Communist Party and Soviet government documents that first became available to researchers in Ukraine toward the end of the 1980s. Professor Kulchytsky was one of the first scholars in Ukraine to study in these newly opened collections. His research and study led to an important conceptual breakthrough in understanding the origins and course of the famine already by late 1991. In his book, Tsina Veliko Перелому, The Cost of the Great Breakthrough, one of the first major studies of collectivization and the famine in Ukraine of 1932-33, published just before the collapse of the Soviet Union and Ukraine's independence, Kulchytsky concluded that while the famine broke out in 1932 due to excessive grain requisitions, it was transformed in late 1932 by Stalin under the guise of continued grain collections, which included the confiscation of all foodstuffs, into a terror famine. The result pointed in the direction of genocide. In his characterization of the famine as a terror famine, Kulchytsky largely follows Conquest's conclusion, but his stress on dividing the 1932-33 famine into two distinct parts allows us to see and understand that the first part of the famine in Ukraine, although extremely severe, can be seen as part of a larger famine that engulfed other regions of the Soviet Union. It also allows us to understand how and when the famine was transformed into the Holodomor, which made the famine in Ukraine distinct, and also allows to see when and how genocide was committed. In his later writings, Kulchytsky refined and added to this narrative, taking into account and incorporating new archival materials and the growing body of scholarly literature on the Soviet-wide famines, and particularly the famine in Ukraine. He argues similarly in this latest book on the famine, which killed hundreds of thousands in the first part of 1932, that it became the Holodomor by late 1932, early 1933, resulting in over 3 million deaths. One of the documents that Kulchytsky highlights in support of this thesis is the January 1, 1933 telegram of Stalin to Ukraine's peasants, which in his view initiated the Holodomor. One can read about this transformation and its results in the 2 chapters of his new book titled The Crushing Blow and the Holodomor. A particular strength of Kulchytsky's book is his discussion of the causal link between communist ideology and its practice, as interpreted by the Soviet leadership, especially Stalin, and in its implementation through collectivization and grain confiscations, which led to famine. This discussion, which constitutes the first part of Professor Kulchytsky's book, is found in one part of his 3-volume study of communism in Ukraine and communist rule in Ukraine from its beginnings to its collapse, published in Ukrainian in 2013, titled Червоний виклик, The Red Challenge. Those who would want to know more about Professor Kulchytsky, his study of the Holodomor, and more broadly about his remarkable and highly productive career, can read my introductory essay in this book, as well as the short biographical information and select bibliography provided by the author himself. I will add that Dr. Kulchytsky, in addition to his many publications in the scholarly field, is also known for his more popular writings. And those who read the newspapers Danyliw and Zerkalo Tygodnia will have run across many of his newspaper articles there. In addition to that, he worked in administration in the Institute of Ukrainian History, held leading positions there, and was an organizer of scholarship, and also headed the department of the interwar period for many, many years, as well as served as the associate or assistant director of the Institute. And finally, he also worked as a mentor to many graduate students, supervising their dissertations, and has written as well, or co-written textbooks. So when I use the word remarkable, it's not used lightly. With that, I want to thank the author for agreeing to come to Canada and speak at several events across this country. This is the second of such events. And with that, I'll end, and I think we can proceed to the question and answer period.